Hey guys, Matt Walksler here. We're back at Wheels Through Time on the Drive for History. We're highlighting this week milestone American motorcycles, and we've got some special ones for you. Today, we're standing in front of the 1936 Harley-Davidson Model EL. The 36 Knucklehead, really regarded as one of the most collectible and highly sought after motorcycles on the planet. If you ask me, we're staring right now at the most beautiful one there ever was. I'll tell you all about the color scheme here real shortly, but first, 1936, Harley-Davidson debuts the Knucklehead. All new machine, overhead valve, 4-speed transmission wrapped in a cradle frame. Just absolutely revolutionized the motorcycle industry. It really doesn't matter what you're riding today, whether it's American, Japanese, European, the 36 Knucklehead in one way or another influenced those machines and really had a large part to do with what they are today. So this machine, as desirable as they come, this one was restored. I think my dad and I did this bike in 2009 or 2010, if I'm not mistaken. Started out with a basket case, 1936, incredibly rare engine. Now the engine of a 36, again, almost all one-year only components, but then again, so is the rest of the motorcycle. So big revolution in power when it came to the Knucklehead. Traditionally, or up to this point, Harley-Davidson was operating on the VL platform, 74 and 80 cubic inch flathead motorcycles, sliding gear, 3-speed clunk box transmissions, and again, the 36 revolutionized all of that stuff. First thing that really made the bike what it is, and I know you guys have probably heard me talk about Knuckleheads a lot, one of our favorite bikes here at the museum, one of our favorite models. Really, it all starts right here at the heart of the motorcycle, the engine. 61 cubic inch, that's 1,000 cc, overhead valve, single cam, dry sump circulating oil system. Just absolutely changed the way that we think about motorcycles, the way that we maintain motorcycles, the way that we ride motorcycles. So, as far as the advancements from the VL, what the difference was, overhead valves. First thing they learned with overhead valves, and Harley had been doing overhead valve configurations on some of their racing machines. I think as early as 1916, they come out with the 8-valve. Through the 1920s, Harley-Davidson made the P-shooter, smaller displacement overhead valve, hemispherical combustion chamber motors, small displacement 350, 500 cc singles. The Knucklehead was the first of their overhead valve twin-cylinder road-going machines. Now, overhead valve, you just get significantly more power out of overhead valve machines than your flathead machines. You can acquire a higher compression. The valves are right there over the head as opposed to on the side of the engine, or on the side of the bore. Higher compression, better airflow, better carburetor. Single cam configuration down low, operated with push rods and rocker arms to open the valves overhead. The dry sump circulating oil system, really one of the most ingenious inventions in motorcycling, period. Extended engine life, extended oil life. The dry sump system on the 36 Knucklehead was actually predated by Indian. Indian was a few years ahead of Harley to get to the circulating system. Harley first incorporated it right here on the 36. Here's your dry sump pump here right in the back. And the way that this works, oil is fed down through the back of the oil tank to the feed line down into the lower end of the engine. A fully pressurized motor, the Knuckleheads were. So oil was pumped in through the cam cover, in through the end of the pinion shaft, lubricated your right side case bearings, actually moved through a passageway through the flywheel and lubricated the crank bearings just as well. On top of that, the overhead oil line here out of the cam cover supplies oil to the top end, lubricates valves, rocker arms. Gravity feeds back down the push rods. You can actually see the drains right out of the bottom of the tappet blocks here, and it's actually fed back to the oil tank. So keep in mind, you're coming from a time of total loss oil systems. Since the beginning of motorcycling, and they really started with kind of drip feed oilers, introduced the mechanical oiler shortly after, mid-19-teens, with the mechanical oiler. Oiling operated off engine speed, but it just fed it down into the lower end of the engine. Circulating oil pump on the Knucklehead allowed oil to be circulated from the tank down to the motor, up throughout the engine, back down to the bottom. and back to the oil tank, all done through a mechanical breather that used the crankcase pressure acquired from pistons moving up and down to pump that oil throughout the engine. So big improvement, especially for longevity. Now, the machine itself is really as glorious of a motorcycle I think was ever produced. Entirely new style and function. Almost every piece on the 36 Knucklehead was designed for this bike and this bike only. So new double down tube, and when I mean double down tube, you've got the two tubes here that cradle the motor between the two lower tubes. 36 Knucklehead frame is actually a 1 year only frame, a continuous tube all the way down from the neck to the rear axle plates. The sidecar loops are actually brazed on. Later on, actually in 1937, they incorporated castings down here where the tubing ended here, was brazed into the sidecar loop casting, and then the lower tube out the bottom went to the rear axle plate. All new constant mesh 4-speed transmission. This time, or up until this time, they were operating on the sliding gear transmission. Really kind of a clunky, primitive setup, difficult to downshift. Shifts were a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Deliberate. Where this slides into gear, up, down, really as easy as it gets. So the 4-speed transmission, all new setup. Again, first of the horseshoe oil tanks. Now the horseshoe oil tank was something you see on Harley Davidson all the way up into the 1960s. This particular oil tank is actually a flat top oil tank. This is kind of a prototype version. They put these on about the first 100 or so 36 Knuckleheads. So all new steel welded gas tanks. Prior to this, on the VLs, the 45 RL models of the era, they were leaded together. These are all new, stamped shell with a welded on back, 3.5 gallon tanks, new instrument panel up front. Again, one of the most beautiful machines that was ever produced, really before or after. The 36 is one of our favorites. Now over on the other side, I want to show you a couple more of the 1 year 36 only features. Of course, the heads. Now Harley Davidson would kind of redesign their Knuckleheads and evolve their Knuckleheads for the first several years of production. The 36 is easily identifiable by not only the boss here in plug for a primer cup, which you see these normally plugged, but the V that held the rocker arms up in the top, we kind of refer to it as a lazy V. In later years, they've kind of tightened that up and strengthen it up. So the 36 heads, the most primitive, probably you might say the least, just the weakest. Not that they weren't sufficient for standard everyday riding. High RPMs, you get into all new problems. So one of the neat things about this 36, it's a particularly high VIN number for the year, but it's got one of the earliest features of the early 36 cases. That's this small timing plug. It's what we refer to as a small timing plug motor. So early on, again, the first 100 or couple hundred 36 Knuckleheads had this ultra small timing plug. It's really difficult to see the timing mark on the flywheel through this plug. They would update that with a larger hole and a larger plug, really near the beginning of 36 production. As the story goes, kind of the confusing part about this is you've got that high VIN number with the small plug. As the story goes, they actually pulled some of those cases that were already cast and machined and set them aside early on in production when they developed the new larger plug motors. And as they got to the end of the production, rather than run a new batch of cases and castings, they took some of those old engine cases that they had discarded early on, incorporated them into the latest 36 Knuckleheads that were produced that year. So some of the other features, again, the famous 1936 Knucklehead shifter, one of the most difficult parts in the world for us old motorcycle treasure hunters to find is the shifter. So this is a 1 year only tubular round shifter with a straight shift gate that actually works with a detent down here at the bottom that holds it in its position. Really unique setup, 1936 only. Geez, what else do we got here? Early clutch, early 36 only primary cover, 36 only rear fenders, the rear brake. Also one of those things that, now again, when you debut a new model, there's always going to be teething problems. There's always going to be things you can find to improve upon. The 36 rear brake was kind of an underperforming rear brake. By 1937, they had made that the brake shoes and the brake drums. Of course, the backing plate also significantly larger. So 1936 only, 1 year backing plate. So we're going to get this machine fired up for you. You can hear it run. It's just an absolutely stellar bike. Remember, first of the 61 cubic inch overhead valve models. The power was unparalleled at the time. There's always this big argument between the guys here at the museum. What was the first 100-mile-an-hour motorcycle from Harley-Davidson? Big kind of debate between the guys. I tend to think it's the 1936 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead. Now, before I fire this thing up, one of the things you notice about this bike compared to the other 36s you've seen is the color. Okay, now 1936, standard colors. You had, I believe, teak red and black, you had Sherwood green and silver, and then you had Venetian blue and Croydon cream. Now Harley-Davidson at the time, now in the early 1930s, Harley-Davidson sales were so low that they actually sent a bulletin out to their dealers to say, hey, dealers, tell your customers if they special order it, we'll paint it any color they want. So as a result, large amounts of custom colors were used over the years. Harley-Davidson was really good to save those colors. Now what we're looking at over here, really incredibly historic piece. Original paint and striping samples from the 30s and 40s. These hung on the paint shop wall at Juneau Avenue at Harley-Davidson. These are some of the custom color inspirations that they used and would use, would hold the cards, keep the cards in the on the wall in order to be able to identify, memorize, and kind of reconfigure a lot of these custom colors. So through they were put into the Rolodex some years later. They were actually taken off the paint shop wall in the 50s by Charlie Stahl, a Harley-Davidson employee. Over the years, they made their way to Wheels Through Time right here in the Rolodex. So as we're flipping through, and you can see just some really cool colors. Here's the TT Knucklehead you guys might remember from an earlier Drive for History. We used this paint card, the orange and red with the black and silver striping. What else have we used here? Oh God, that's a beautiful one. Orange, green with the silver stripe and the red thin stripe. Here's the gold. So we took this right out of the Rolodex, had the color scanned and matched. Of course, our painter, John Dills, does all of our work for us. John absolutely nailed the color, and we've used it here for a few restorations here at the museum. So original Rolodex with Harley-Davidson custom paint colors. So you'll never see another artifact like this anywhere in the world. Such a neat piece and something we still use for inspiration all the time. So gold and black 1936 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead with the red and gold pinstriping. Like I said, it doesn't get much better than this. We're gonna fire this thing up for you here right now. You can hear what these babies sound like, and as they say, the rest is history. About 1,636 Knuckleheads, low production. Keep in mind, this is still really the depths of the motorcycle depression. It wasn't until World War II that Harley-Davidson really was able to leap out of that and start their big production numbers again. So 36, 61 OHV, the revolutionary machine that changed motorcycling for generations. There it is. Runs as good as the day it left the factory. 61 miles on the odometer since restoration. We really need some more miles on it. And 1936 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead, guys. Make sure you tune in all this spring, this winter. Drive for History, we're going to be highlighting a lot of the rare machines here at Wheels Through Time, show you guys what makes us the museum that runs. Make sure you check out wheelsthroughtime.com, support the museum today. We wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.